The bitter cold swept through Manhattan on December 15th, 1997. The thermometer read 28 degrees, and each gust of wind felt like ice against your skin. Outside Trump Tower, tourists huddled together, pointing and smiling at the beautiful Christmas displays that filled the windows. The twinkling lights cast a warm glow on their faces as they took pictures and shared laughs. But just around the corner, hidden from all this joy and warmth, was an alley that most people pretended not to see. Here, pressed against the cold brick wall, sat 12-year-old Sarah Henderson. Her thin jacket did little to keep out the cold. Her fingers had turned red and numb, but they still held tightly to her most precious possession, a worn-out copy of The Little Prince. This book meant everything to Sarah. Its pages were bent, and the cover was falling apart, but she didn't care. It was the last gift her father had given her on her birthday, just 3 months before he died. Now, alone in this forgotten alley, Sarah held onto this book like it was her last connection to warmth, to family, to hope. She pulled the book closer to her chest, trying to find comfort in its familiar weight. The words on its pages had become her escape, her way of forgetting about the cold, about her empty stomach, about how different her life had become. But today, even The Little Prince couldn't chase away the bitter reality of her situation. She was just a young girl, fighting to survive another day on the unforgiving streets of New York City. Just 8 months before that cold December morning, Sarah's life had been completely different. She was just like any other kid in middle school, walking the hallways with her backpack full of books and her head full of dreams. Her teachers always smiled when they handed back her tests. Straight A's every time. During lunch breaks, you'd find her in the chess club room, leading meetings as the club president. She had even won the science fair with her project on renewable energy. Everyone said she had a bright future ahead. Maybe she'd cure cancer one day, they used to say. Her mom, Linda, couldn't have been prouder. For 15 years, Linda had worked as a nurse at the local hospital, taking care of others' families while building a good life for her own. Their small house wasn't fancy, but it was home. Photos of Sarah's science fair victories covered the fridge, and her chess trophies lined the living room shelf. But life can change in the time it takes a doctor to say 3 words. It's stage 3. Linda's breast cancer diagnosis hit them like a thunderbolt on a clear day. They thought they were ready for anything. They had insurance, savings, a plan. But then came the letter from the insurance company. Claim denied, it said. Something about a pre-existing condition. All those years of paying premiums. And now, when they needed it most, they were on their own. The medical bills piled up faster than autumn leaves. First came the notice for one missed mortgage payment, then another, then a third. Each envelope in the mailbox felt heavier than the last. The day they locked their front door for the last time, Sarah and Linda became 2 more numbers in a tragic statistic, joining 23,494 other New Yorkers with no place to call home, just as the city was about to face its coldest winter in decades. On that fateful Monday morning, Linda had left at 4 a.m. She knew the line for the emergency room would be long, and she needed to secure a spot. Sarah, too sick to even sit up, stayed behind, shivering under a pile of blankets. Her fever had spiked to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, her body weak and drained. She could hardly remember the last time she felt well. As the minutes ticked by, the room felt colder and colder, though Sarah didn't have the strength to turn on the heater. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling utterly alone. Her only solace was the book her mother had given her. The words on the page blurred, but she forced herself to read over and over again the same line. What is essential is invisible to the eye. It seemed like the only thought that made any sense in her foggy, feverish state. Her eyelids were heavy, and the world around her felt like a dream. But then, out of nowhere, a shadow fell across her page. The shift in the air was so sudden, it startled her. She thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her, or maybe a stranger who had wandered into the room. But when she looked up, she froze. Standing before her was none other than Donald Trump. His towering presence filled the doorway. The light from the window framed him in a way that made it seem as if he appeared out of thin air. His coat, a dark, expensive-looking garment, shimmered in the light, a symbol of wealth and power. The kind of wealth that made her mother's entire 3-month salary seem like pocket change. For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. Her fevered mind raced to make sense of what she was seeing. Why was he here, in her small, modest home? What could this possibly mean? Was it a dream? She blinked, but he was still there. His gaze was soft, almost empathetic, though it was hard to imagine a man like him feeling anything for someone like her. She couldn't speak. She could only stare at him, her body trembling, unsure of what was happening. The room felt surreal, as if the universe itself had bent, allowing this bizarre moment to unfold. The warmth of his coat contrasted with the coldness of her own skin, the fever burning her from within. And for a long moment, neither of them said a word. The silence was thick with tension, suspense, and something unspoken, something Sarah couldn't yet grasp. But she knew, deep down, that this moment would change everything. What happened next was captured by a single security camera, a forgotten lens that would later hold more weight than anyone could have ever imagined. Trump's team, in their usual meticulous way, tried to bury the footage, not out of shame, not because it painted a picture of failure or embarrassment, but because it revealed something deeper, something raw, that they couldn't control. The moment was too real, too human, and too powerful for anyone to ignore. For 23 minutes, a man who was used to having everything at his disposal, power, fame, influence, wealth, sat on cold, unforgiving concrete beside a sick, homeless child. It was the kind of scene that no one could have predicted, not even the cameras that silently watched in the corners of the room. And yet, there it was, a powerful man, once surrounded by luxury, stripped of his title and his privilege, sitting on the floor, listening to the quiet pain of a child who had nothing but her story. Sarah's voice, fragile and barely audible, filled the space between them. Each word she spoke seemed to come from a place of profound sorrow, a place that no child should ever have to reach. She spoke of nights spent shivering in the dark, of days without food, of the hollow feeling of being invisible in a world that passed her by. Her voice trembled with fever, but also with the weight of years spent fighting battles that no one could see, a constant struggle against a world that had forgotten her. Her hands, tiny and fragile, shook not from the cold that clung to the concrete floor beneath them, but from the fever that ravaged her body, making her chest burn with each breath. It wasn't just the sickness that made her tremble, though. It was the uncertainty, the fear that she might never be heard, that her pain might never be understood. The fever clouded her mind, made her feel weak, but it also gave her the courage to speak her truth, the truth she had been holding inside for so long, the truth that needed to be shared. And in that moment, Donald Trump, of all people, listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to rush her along with hollow promises or empty words. He simply listened. His presence was calm, almost unsettlingly so, as if the world around him had ceased to matter. No matter how much power he held, no matter how much wealth he had accumulated, none of that seemed to matter in this tiny, dimly lit room, where all that existed was Sarah's voice and his quiet attention. His usual stern expression softened, his eyes never leaving her face as she spoke. For 23 minutes, he didn't look away, didn't seem distracted, didn't check his phone or glance toward his guards in the hallway. He didn't try to fix her situation, didn't offer empty reassurances. No, what he did was far more profound. He allowed Sarah to be heard. In a world that often ignored the silent cries of the forgotten, he sat there, beside a little girl who had nothing to her name but a fever and a broken heart. The room felt small, the air thick with emotion, as if the weight of everything unsaid hung between them. Sarah's words were slow, broken at times, but the rawness of her story was undeniable. Every word felt like a plea for someone, anyone, to see her, to recognize her existence, to know that she mattered. And through it all, Trump stayed. No one would have expected it. The cameras, hidden in corners, would later catch the stillness of the moment, capturing the way he leaned in slightly, his face softened by an expression that was rare for him, genuine empathy. It was the kind of scene that could change everything for a moment in history, the kind of footage that, when released, would send shockwaves through the media, through the public, through everyone who thought they knew him. But what they didn't realize, what they couldn't see, was that it wasn't just about who Trump was. It was about the child, the girl who had been forgotten by society, by the system, by the world. She was the one who needed help, not him. Yet, in those 23 minutes, Sarah had something the rest of the world had been too busy to notice, someone who cared enough to listen. It wasn't the usual story of power or control, of wealth and influence. This moment wasn't about any of those things. It was about human connection, raw and unfiltered. It was about a man who, in the midst of his own empire, stopped everything to hear the story of a child. And in doing so, he revealed something to the world, a side of him that no one expected to see, but perhaps the one that mattered most. The footage, when it eventually surfaced, would leave people speechless. The world would question what it meant. Why had Trump done it? What had moved him? Was it a moment of genuine compassion, or just a fleeting act? The answers might never fully come. But what couldn't be denied was the rawness of the moment, the undeniable truth of a man who took the time to listen, to sit beside a sick little girl and offer her something more valuable than any riches: his attention, his time, and his willingness to hear her story. For 23 minutes, they existed together in a space of pure, unspoken understanding. And in those minutes, the world was changed, not by power or politics, but by a simple act of kindness, an act so rare, so unexpected, that it would linger in the hearts of those who saw it for a long, long time. When Trump realized just how sick Sarah truly was, something shifted in his expression. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a sharpness, a sudden awareness of the gravity of the situation. The walls of the room, once filled with the tension of unspoken words, seemed to close in on them both as he looked at Sarah. Her feverish face, flushed with heat, her tiny body trembling uncontrollably. It was more than he had anticipated. Without a moment's hesitation, Trump pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly over the screen. The urgency in his actions spoke louder than any words could. This wasn't a situation that could be ignored, not anymore. He dialed a number. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar, but Trump's tone was different, sharp, filled with an emotion that hadn't been there before. "I need you here, now," he said, his voice low but firm. It was a call to his personal physician. Seconds later, he hung up, and without pause, he dialed another number. The call went through quickly, and Trump's usual commanding presence was replaced by an uncharacteristic sense of urgency. "I need a room ready. Prepare it immediately, and get the best medical staff in the city on standby," he instructed, speaking to his hotel manager. But then, just as the weight of what needed to be done settled in, Trump's face darkened. His hand trembled ever so slightly as he reached for his phone again. This time, the call would alter everything. The course of Sarah's life, Linda's world, and his own fate. The conversation was quick, almost curt, but there was a deep determination behind each word. He knew the stakes now, and this was more than just an act of kindness. It had become a matter of life and death. Still, time was running out. Linda was at the hospital, oblivious to the fact that her daughter's fever had climbed even higher, dangerously high. She was unaware that, in that small room, her daughter's life was hanging by a thread, that her fragile condition was spiraling out of control. Linda had no idea that the battle for Sarah's survival wasn't just being fought in the emergency room, but in a place far removed from the sterile hospital walls. And Sarah? Sarah was slipping, slowly, imperceptibly, in and out of consciousness, her body too weak to fight the fever that ravaged her. She had been clinging to life for so long, but the fever was taking its toll. Her small body, trembling uncontrollably, could hardly keep up. Her thoughts were foggy, her vision blurred, and the world around her seemed to be slipping away, like sand through her fingers. Trump, in that moment, was all too aware of how fragile time was. He looked down at Sarah, her eyes barely open, her tiny hand still clutching his. There was no time left for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. What had started as an unexpected encounter had turned into a desperate race against the clock. He stood up abruptly, his gaze lingering on Sarah for just a moment longer, before he moved with purpose, knowing that everything he did from this point on would determine whether this fragile girl would survive or not. He wasn't just dealing with the situation that had appeared at his feet. He was holding the life of an innocent child in his hands. And for once, it wasn't about power or politics or wealth. It was about something far more important: saving a life, no matter the cost. What Trump did next defied every cynical expectation. It wasn't what anyone thought he would do. No cameras, no grand gestures for the press, no carefully crafted public statement. This wasn't about his image, his reputation, or making headlines. It was something far more personal, something no one saw coming. He took action, immediate and decisive. Within hours, Sarah, the sick little girl who had barely been clinging to life, was transferred to one of the best hospitals in Manhattan. It wasn't a rushed decision. It wasn't just a favor or a kind gesture. It was a commitment, a promise that he would do whatever it took to save her. The finest doctors, the best care, everything was in place, all arranged with a speed that could only come from someone who had the power to make it happen in an instant. But there was no fanfare, no public acknowledgement. It was just the quiet, determined resolve of a man who had made up his mind. Meanwhile, Linda, still desperately searching the alleyways, her heart pounding with fear, had no idea what was happening. She had no way of knowing that her daughter was being rushed to safety, to a place where she would finally get the treatment she needed. But as frantic hours passed, Linda's search was finally over. In the midst of the chaos, she was reunited with Sarah, her heart lifting in relief as she saw her daughter's face, pale but alive, resting peacefully in a hospital bed. The emotional weight of the moment was unbearable. Linda had never imagined she would find her daughter in a place like this, a world away from the dark streets she had searched. But this wasn't the end of the story. In fact, it was where the real miracle began. Because what followed in those next few days was nothing short of extraordinary. Sarah's condition, once so dire, began to improve at an astonishing rate. The doctors couldn't explain it. It wasn't just the medication or the skilled care she received. It was as if something beyond medical science was at work. Her fever began to subside, her color slowly returned to her face, and her energy, once drained, started to come back. The child who had been slipping in and out of consciousness, on the brink of death, was now on the path to recovery. And in the days that followed, Linda was left in awe of the transformation. But there was more to the story than just Sarah's recovery. It wasn't just the medical miracle that had unfolded. It was the ripple effect that this unexpected act of kindness created. Word spread quietly at first, whispers of what Trump had done, of how he had stepped into the lives of two strangers without any expectation of praise or recognition. The miracle wasn't just Sarah's survival. It was the impact it had on everyone who heard about it. The way it reminded people of the power of compassion, of the difference one person's actions could make. And for Linda and Sarah, it was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild their lives, to find hope again, and to know that sometimes, just sometimes, a single act of kindness could change everything. Trump may not have waited for the world to see his actions, but the world saw the results. And in the end, the miracle wasn't just about saving a life. It was about restoring faith in something greater than power or wealth. It was about humanity, about how one simple act can shift the course of lives forever. Over the next 6 months, Trump's organization worked quietly, almost invisibly, behind the scenes. It was the kind of work that would never make the news, never be shared with the public. And yet, it was the kind of help that would change the lives of two people forever. Linda's medical bills, once an insurmountable weight that hung over her every waking moment, vanished. The stacks of overdue bills, the calls from creditors, the looming fear that Sarah's treatment might never be fully paid for, all of it simply disappeared. There was no announcement, no press release, no congratulatory statement. It was as if the burden had been quietly lifted from their lives, with no fanfare or recognition, just a simple act of compassion that would never be seen by the world. But the help didn't stop there. A 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, the kind of place Linda had once only dreamed of, appeared. No longer would she and Sarah have to worry about the dangers of the streets, the uncertainty of where they would sleep at night, or whether they would have a roof over their heads. This new home was their sanctuary, a place of safety, stability, and the possibility of a new beginning. Again, there was no press, no cameras capturing the moment Linda stepped into her new home. It wasn't about a public display of generosity. It was about giving them a chance to rebuild their lives. Then came the job interviews. Linda, who had spent so many years struggling to make ends meet, now found herself in a position to truly build a future. Trump's team had quietly arranged interviews for her at several respected companies, ones that offered the kind of security she had never imagined. She walked into those rooms with a sense of hope, a sense that, maybe, this was her time to start again. And when she walked out, it was with the knowledge that she had secured a job, a steady, well-paying job that would allow her to provide for Sarah without constantly looking over her shoulder. But the most surprising part? Sarah's return to school. Not just any school, one of Manhattan's top private academies, a place that many children could only dream of attending, especially a child like Sarah. The kind of institution that would offer her the education, the opportunities, and the future she had never even dared to imagine. Sarah, who had once struggled to stay conscious in the alley, who had been sick and homeless, was now walking into a classroom with a future that was bright and full of promise. All of this, every single step, happened without a single headline. There were no photos of Linda and Sarah standing in front of their new apartment, no heartwarming stories about their new life. There was no tweet from Trump's account, no press conference to tout his actions. In fact, no one outside of a few trusted individuals would even know that this had all happened, let alone that it had been made possible by the quiet generosity of one man and his team. The true miracle wasn't in the attention or the accolades. It was in the transformation that happened in the lives of Linda and Sarah, and how it was done without asking for anything in return. This wasn't about recognition or applause. It was about giving two people who had been forgotten a chance to start again, to build a future they could have never dreamed of. And as Sarah walked into that first day at her new school, her heart full of hope, her eyes bright with possibility, she didn't know that the true miracle wasn't just about what she had received. It was about the quiet kindness that had made it all possible. Today, Sarah Henderson Brooks stands before her own classroom in the Bronx. But she's not just any teacher. She's a woman whose life, once marked by unimaginable hardship, has now become a beacon of hope for others. Sarah has built something extraordinary, a foundation dedicated to helping homeless students, just like she once was, stay in school. Through her foundation, over 300 students have been given the opportunity to continue their education, to dream of a future, to know that their circumstances don't define their potential. She's not just teaching lessons in the classroom. She's teaching her students what it means to rise above adversity, to fight for their future, and to never give up, no matter how hard the road may seem. Linda, too, has transformed her life. Once a woman struggling with everything from her daughter's health to her own survival, Linda is now cancer-free. The fight she had waged against both disease and the harsh realities of life had almost broken her, but she emerged victorious. Today, Linda is a counselor, guiding and advising families who are up against the same ruthless forces she once faced. Insurance companies that stand between people and their survival. She helps those families navigate the system, offering them hope, a voice, and the kind of guidance she herself needed years ago. Her journey has come full circle, and now she's giving back, ensuring that others don't have to fight their battles alone. And then, there's the security footage. That footage, capturing the pivotal moment when a powerful man, standing in front of a homeless child, chose to listen instead of turning away, remained hidden for years. It was a story that, until last year, had remained behind closed doors, buried in the archives of a world that preferred to forget such acts of kindness. But eventually, a former employee decided that the world needed to see it. The footage was shared, quietly at first, but soon it spread across the internet, revealing the raw humanity of a moment that could never be erased. The world watched, many in disbelief, as they saw the moment when Trump, despite everything, chose to show kindness to a child who had nothing. And as the footage went viral, it sparked a conversation about compassion, about generosity, and about how a single act of kindness can change the course of so many lives. It was a moment that no one had expected to see, But in hindsight, it was clear that it was always meant to be shared, not for fame or fortune, but to remind the world that even the most unlikely of people can make a difference when they choose to act with their heart. Today, Sarah and Linda stand as living proof of what can happen when one person chooses to act, when one individual takes a moment to listen, and when hope is given to those who have none. They are living the very miracle that began that fateful day, and their story continues to inspire, to uplift, and to show the world that kindness can, indeed, change everything. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. It was never supposed to be told. Trump had only one condition for his help: complete silence. No publicity, no recognition, no cameras following his every move, no reporters ready to turn a good deed into a headline. Nothing. In fact, the whole world was meant to remain oblivious to what had really happened. He didn't want praise, didn't need a thank you. The only thing that mattered was that Sarah got better, that Linda was given a chance to rebuild, and that their lives were changed forever. The moment he made that first call, the moment he chose to help, it was always about them, not about his name, not about his image. It was about offering a lifeline when there was no one else to do so, about changing lives without any need for recognition. Because sometimes, the most genuine acts of kindness are the ones that were never meant to be seen. They're the quiet moments, the ones that don't make the headlines, the ones where the person giving doesn't expect anything in return. Not fame, not gratitude, just the satisfaction of knowing they've done something that mattered. And that's what Trump understood from the start. He didn't need to announce his actions to the world. He didn't need to show off how much he could help. The good he did wasn't for show. It was for real, for the people whose lives he touched. And that's the essence of what makes this story so special. The unspoken kindness that was given freely, without any desire for acknowledgement. Even when the footage eventually surfaced, it wasn't about calling attention to the man behind the gesture. It was about what that moment represented: the quiet dignity of helping another human being without any agenda, without any expectation. And as the world learned about the extraordinary act of kindness that had changed Sarah and Linda's lives, it wasn't the man who stood in the footage that became the story. It was the lives he had touched, the difference he had made, and the lesson that sometimes the most powerful acts of kindness are the ones done without a single word being spoken.